In this recall help video, we're going to be going through the recalling options of adopt parent PSR, adopt child PSRs, and replace children. As discussed in other videos, the recall workflow is kind of all about the 99% use case, where very often you're just going to be creating a recall tag, double clicking, storing the object. Well, when it comes to these three options, it's about that other 1%. Now, when it comes to these three recalling options, it tends to be very mechanical and specific. So we have a nice simplified scene file here to just kind of step through these. Now, I've got a cube stack starting with a cube on the bottom and going up, up, up. And then we've got a sphere stack starting with the green one and going up, up, up. So that's what we're going to be playing with here. Let's start from scratch by deleting the recall tag, creating a brand new one on top of the cubes, and double clicking to store that current state. Now, by default, if I were to transfer this over onto the spheres and double click, the entire hierarchy gets replaced, and it's replaced by this new object. Essentially, it's adopted the PSR of that first object that the tag was directly on, and then it just recreated this entire object on it. So that makes sense. Hitting undo, the first thing we can change is adopt parent PSR. If I were to turn that off, it is no longer worried about copying onto the position of the original. So even though this tag is on the sphere stack, when I double click, the sphere stack is gotten rid of and replaced by a copy of the cube stack. But the cube stack is taking its original PSR and transferring it over here. So we get two identical copies of this. So it's almost like copy and pasting one, but we did replace it. And thanks to relink to external that we talked about in a different help video, that would automatically find them, replace them. There are definitely reasons to be able to do that. So that is one thing you can do with these advanced recalling options. Hitting undo, we get back to our original stack. Turning back on adopt parent PSR. So we're back to the default settings. Let's talk about the next one, adopt child PSRs. Now we currently have a stack of 4 objects and each of them has their own local PSR. If we say, let's look at the child PSRs and recall. So I've currently got the cubes stored inside here. Let's double click. And this time, instead of replacing all of those completely, they've been replaced, but their local PSR has been adopted by what we copied over to it. So its replacement took on all of their local positions all the way through the hierarchy. It's very important to remember it's via the entire hierarchy. If these were not matching hierarchies, the things that didn't match from one to the other would be left behind or ignored. So just keep that in mind. Hitting undo, we go back to the original state again. And let's turn off adopt child PSR. So we're back to default. And lastly, we have replace children. So currently, when we transfer something, we are saying, okay, I've stored this hierarchy and now I've copied on this object. Destroy that object, all of its children, and replace it by the new one. So in this case, if I were to say, oh, let's actually do this differently. Let's store the sphere stack. So on the sphere, right click a brand new recall tag, double click to store it. So I've got that sphere stored, drag this onto the cube. If I were to say double click, then that original cube gets completely replaced and its hierarchy by this sphere stack. That's fine. Let's hit undo and say, actually, don't replace the children. So we'll turn that checkbox off. Now, when I double click to replace, only the original cube gets replaced with the entire stack and its children get to remain behind. So it's kind of like replacing one object with an entire hierarchy of a different one, and its children can continue to survive. Now, this can get extra interesting and I guess complicated, but it's pretty neat. If we were to undo, so we're back to default again, let's even turn replace children back to default. So this is exactly all defaults. Let's copy this recall tag to all 4 cubes. With these all at default, if I were to select all of them and say recall, not too much happens. The very first cube is getting replaced, but that means it destroys the children, and those children recall tags could never get triggered. Thus, we just get the one hierarchy. I guess that makes sense. If we were to undo, though, and say don't replace the children, that means that when this first one executes, the second one is going to still live, and that means it can execute. And then the third, and then the fourth, each can go. So just by turning off from the defaults, turning off replace children, if I click recall now, every cube gets replaced by a copy of the entire hierarchy of recall, also adopting its local parent PSR. So that can get really interesting. The combinations of these objects are really good for replacing more complex hierarchies, Perhaps you need to clone a bunch of joints onto what used to be cubes. You're just trying to transfer one object to another. There's a bunch of opportunities here, but as I said, it's assumed that most of the time, 99% of the workflow, none of these settings need to be changed from their defaults. They should just work the way you expect. But every once in a while, you might run into a circumstance where you need to do this more complex replacing. So I thought it'd be nice to have these options in there.